to shift the topic just slightly and introduce our next guest, which is Ursula Macfarlane, filmmaker extraordinaire. Most recently, I like to say extraordinaire because I think you're one cool lady. You have had some amazing achievements over your career, and the recent nod that which we will be talking about now is your documentary Untouchable, which is about the Harvey Weinstein sexual harassment scandal case, which actually came out before he was before his trial actually came about. So would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about how you got started and leading up to this documentary.
Okay, so yeah, well, I got into the business a bit later than most people. I think I started working in this business around when I was about 29, 30. And I'm always reading that Ava DuVernay had a kind of previous career. So that makes me feel a little bit better. Because at the time I used to think, oh God, I'm so old. I'm too old to be doing this. But I had done other things before that. I'd lived in Japan, worked in Japan, teaching, worked in PR, which was a very strange job, publicizing orchestras and stuff. So I had this kind of weird sort of business teaching kind of background. And it was a friend who was at the National Film School, actually, who introduced me to a friend of theirs who was producing a graduation film. And I just left the job that I currently had that I was really unhappy in and went off and helped her produce her graduation film. And that sort of was the bug that got me started. And then after that, I guess it was, quite traditional, worked as a researcher, then worked as an assistant producer, then as a producer, and then decided, no, I want to be the one sort of responsible for this, the one making ultimately at the end of the day, the buck stops with me in terms of the artistic decision. So, and I ended up being a director. And I mainly make documentaries, although I have done some scripted work as well.
And again, we applaud your work to date and would love you to kind of give us a deep dive into the Harvey Weinstein documentary.
Yeah, so that came about. I was working, the lady on screen there is a young actress called Paz de la Huerta, who was, you might remember her from Boardwalk Empire. And actually her dismissal or leaving that show kind of coincided with her being raped by Harvey Weinstein twice, according to her. It's so difficult because I spent all of last year when we were publicizing this film and going to film festivals and at the Sundance Festival, and that was before his conviction for rape and sexual assault.
Right.
And it was kind of drummed into me that I couldn't, just talk about this as a done deal, that it always had to be alleged and as people allege and apparently, Whereas now I don't have to say that anymore.
You're right.
I can say he's a rape, and it is it's a very satisfying thing for me, obviously, because I spent a long time listening to those women telling us of their indescribably awful experiences at the hands of Harvey Weinstein, and then obviously the way that they were discredited and attacked by him and his lawyers for nearly 2 years actually before the trial. So it's a great sense of satisfaction that we and others, not just us, but other journalists and films were able to give them a platform to talk. Some of them a platform, because obviously there's dozens and dozens of accusers, to give them a platform to. And I remember we went to the Sundance Film Festival with this film. We premiered it there, and I would go around doing these interviews, and I was with Rosanna Arquette, who's actually the only really famous actress in the film, because I did. Most of the women in this film don't have that kind of public profile. And that was important for us because we wanted to make sure that, there were quote unquote ordinary people there who'd also gone through the same thing. And they would always say to us, so, should Harvey Weinstein be going to jail? And Rosanna would go, yes, absolutely. He should be locked up tomorrow, kind of thing. And I'd have to go, well, obviously, if he is found guilty in a court of law. And it was just really, really frustrating. Anyway, I don't have to do that anymore.
Right. Well, I mean, it did shed light on lots of detail of what was happening back then, not only to the women, but to the men who were involved in sometimes masking what was actually happening or being paid off, et cetera, et cetera. What was your emotional journey when making this documentary? Because it is It is a sensitive subject, and Harvey Weinstein's not the first person, unfortunately, to be accused and trialed and sent to jail for these kind of things. So
yeah, no, absolutely not, and he certainly won't be the last, sadly. But I do think the high-profile nature of this story has enabled other people to come out, and I hope that, you know, in the future, people, victims, because unfortunately it will happen again, will be able to speak out more quickly and hopefully stop this happening in the way that it has been happening. But to your question of the men, I think, you know, it wasn't just Harvey Weinstein's colleagues and employees, but it's a whole network, a web really around a lot of these powerful men, and they mainly are men, running these studios and businesses and corporations all over the world, you know, because they have successful careers. And, you know, if you worked for Harvey Weinstein and you did well, you know, your career was kind of pretty much guaranteed. So a lot of those people had a lot to lose by speaking out. And so you know, the people that appeared in our film, the men, or not all men, but the colleagues of Harvey Weinstein, and many of them have been accused of covering up and of being complicit. And I don't think it's that simple. I think some people knew that something was happening. Some people definitely knew what was happening, but I think a lot of them kind of guessed and perhaps were too frightened, or for the reasons I've explained, you know, didn't want to say anything. And I think that, so, you know, I feel that the people who did appear in our film are incredibly courageous, because let me tell you, you know, we spoke to dozens, if not hundreds of people like that, who didn't want to talk to us.
Yeah, and with the lasting impact that the film has had, what do you see? What is the change that you think needs to happen in this industry to shift less harmful, you know, behavior on set, in castings, etc.?
Well, I mean, there have some changes. Some changes have been made, and I think mainly in the US. You know, the Screen Actors Guild has, you know, forced new practices in terms of, I think every set has to have a kind of, I can't remember what they call them, but anyway, someone that you can go to if there's any kind of bullying or harassment or anything that you're uncomfortable about or unhappy about. You can go to that person and report anonymously. There are various, you know, anonymous reporting platforms and phone lines, but, you know, these are sort of dealing with the symptoms. What we have to do is get to the root of it. And I think that's very much about gender parity in terms of not just women directors, but women writers, women heads of studios, women managing directors, you know, and then the story content changes, and then it feels appropriate to have lots of women making the films as well as appearing in the films. And, you know, when I made this film, we had, deliberately so, we had female composer, director, obviously, producer, assistant producer, assistant camera, you know, many of the people involved in the post-production process. And they weren't all women. And that was also a deliberate decision, actually, because I did want men to be involved in this conversation, and for it not to be a kind of, let's ghettoize off and the women can go off and make their film. You know, I wanted it to be inclusive, but it was largely women. And we, you know, made a decision to go out and try and hire female assistant cameras, which, again, the camera world is the sort of stereotypical strong, you know, director of photography. But no, there are some really brilliant young female DOPs and assistants who, you know, training up to be directors of photography. So, you know, so that's a kind of little microcosm of it. And I think if more of that could happen, then if there were more women just kind of in positions of power, I don't think people would get away with it so much.
I agree. And I'm sure the rest of our Soho Media Club fans agree as well. We know that we've got lots of great questions coming in. Thank you so much, Ursula, for giving us that amazing insight into such an important, impactful documentary and an important subject that should never be ignored. So we are grateful for you for making that film and bringing it to light.